Hello, I'm Rob and welcome to R&B Reviews. Today I'm going to be doing a video on Laurel and Hardy, the classic comedy team. Last year I did a video on the team's later Fox films, which got some good comments, but I didn't do a review on the team's later MGM movies, and lately I've been getting some requests to do a video on these two films that they did, so I'm going to do that. The two films that they made at MGM was Raid Wardens that came out in 1943 and Nothing But Trouble that came out in 1944. But first, if you're unfamiliar with Laurel Hardy, let me give you a quick history about the team before I do these review of the two movies, as well as a little bit about how they got where they were at this point. Here's a picture of Laurel and Hardy. If you don't know who they are, that's Oliver Hardy right there, and that's Stan Laurel right here sitting down. And they were a very popular comedy team from the late 1920s up until their retirement in the late 40s, early 50s. So here's a little quick, I'll try and do a quick history about the team if you're not familiar with them. They had their own separate careers in silent film during the 1910s, doing comedies and supporting dramatic work and what have you. And they both ended up at the Roach Studios in the mid-1920s. The Roach was named after producer Hal Roach. He began to notice that these two supporting comedians, Laurel and Hardy, whenever they were supporting their top talent, they had some sort of magic together. So Roach decided to pair them up and start them in their own series, Laurel and Hardy. I believe their first film as a team started in 1927. They starred in some silent shorts, and by 1929 sound came in, and a lot of people in Hollywood were afraid if their stars could handle new sound film, but not Laurel and Hardy. They continued their career and they made some sound shorts. Hal Roach decided to phase out shorts and focus more on feature films, and I've read some quotes from Stan Laurel saying that he thought that was a mistake. He thought the team was much better in shorts than in features, and I kind of agree with him, but nonetheless they did manage to turn out a couple of good feature films while they were still under contract to Hal Roach, like Sons of the Desert from 1932 and Way Out West from 1937, which is my favorite film. But a lot of times they were asked to sort of be comic support behind romantic leading couples, like for example in Swiss. What I liked about Laurel is he actually kind of helped behind camera. He came up with the idea. He and the director of their films would collaborate on some ideas, and he was also allowed to help the editor out, which is something that you did not do with the major studios, and I will talk about that with these two movies. But oftentimes Laurel and Roach were at ends, often fighting over these movies. Like Laurel always wanted to make sure they were very good, while Roach was a little bit more cost, kept his eye on the money, which is understandable. He's the producer, and oftentimes Laurel accused Roach of, changing things during editing. By 1940, Roach decided to focus more on other types of movies, and this time comedy was changing. The clown comedy that Laurel and Hardy and several others like Charlie Chaplin and W.C. Field and the Marx Brothers excelled in was kind of being phased out for more normal-looking, wisecracking comedians like Abbott and Costello, Bob Hope, Danny Kaye, Red Skelton, and Roach felt that these two just didn't fit in with his plan, so he let them go. And sadly, many of Laurel and Hardy's diehard fans felt that they should have just retired right then and there, but I think that because they didn't, they decided to continue on. I think people should appreciate that very much. The way these movies were a little bit different, they did it under the studio system where they just were handed the script and they were expected to perform. They only had maybe like a month or so to shoot these pictures, and they couldn't always spend time on working out gags and stuff. And also, MGM was better known for making sophisticated, witty comedies and not slapstick. If they, I think if they wanted to make slapstick comedy, they should have gone to a studio like Paramount or RKO or Columbia that specialized in them. But MGM was more for doing dramas and witty, sophisticated comedies. And something I always found difficult to understand is why die-hard fans like to bitch and moan that these films weren't made like how they were at Hal Roach. But why should Fox or MGM change their way of making their films, just to do it for a comedian's way? That makes no sense at all. I never understood why people are like, they should have just made it like they did at Roach. Well, each major studio, if you study their pictures, each major studio had their own way of making movies. They had their own formulas, and they probably didn't really like to, mess with that. Let's begin then with the first MGM film that Laurel and Hardy made. Like I said, this movie came out in 1943. It's called Raid Wardens. It's set in a small town in what was then contemporary times. Laurel and Hardy want to do their part for the war effort, so they tried but failed to enlist in the service. Instead, they decided to help in the home front by being air raid wardens in case of an air attack. Now, of these two movies, I think this is the one that tries the closest to recreate a classic Laurel and Hardy film. It has their old foil, Edgar Kennedy. There are gag sequences. for the team to do, and it's mostly a gag-oriented film and relying on the situation rather than on a storyline. However, what I think is different about Air Raid Wardens from their other films is that some of the supporting characters talk down to them by calling them idiots and bumblers. In some cases, like if you look at some of the really old Hal Roach comedies, sometimes their opponent would get so fed up with the team that they found themselves engaging in the same childish behavior as the team. Like, for example, in some of their 1929 shorts like Big Business or Huska, where they end up having a rice fight with James Finless. The film is loaded with a mixed bag of gag sequences, but I felt they were kind of rushed and lacked some of the spontaneity that the team was known for, and I think in some sequences they missed some good opportunities. When the films the team made at Hal Roach, the team would milk a gag sequence just right, and here with Air Raid Wardens, I think they just didn't really. They only had a short amount of time to do that because I suspect that since this was a 60-minute B feature, they really weren't allowed to have that luxury. But still, I thought the team did a good job and seemed to be putting in an effort rather than just going through the motions. Like, there's a nice sequence where Laurel and Hardy think a drill bit is going on, and Laurel and Hardy are trying to get Edgar Kennedy to turn his house lights off. There are some moments that I think fans will find disappointing, or depressing, I should say. Is one, for example, when the team mess up an exercise and are asked to leave the Air Raid Wardens. Laurel has the speech about being not as smart as everybody else. I know some people will find that kind of out of place, but you know what? That was the ingredient of MGM comedies. Like, look at Night at the Opera with the Marx Brothers or Buster Keaton's MGM films or Red Skelton's films. There's a moment where things look bad for the leading comedians, but they brush themselves off and go after the people that knock them down, like in Night at the Opera, or end up doing good, like in this film. In this case, the team come across spies hiding out in town, and for me, that is when the film really picked up. Some pluses to this film was that it did not have a romantic couple to carry the film like some of the team's later Hal Roach films, or a few of the Fox ones for that matter. Because the movie was made during World War II, you do get a few support the war and patriotic speeches that date the film. With the 1930s Laurel and Hardy films, you don't really care that these movies are set in the 1930s because it's not the focus of the film. The gags and the situations are, and normally they don't date too bad. I thought Air Raid Wardens was an amusing film. I didn't find it to be a laugh-out-loud one, but I thought Laurel and Hardy put in an effort, and I thought there was some entertaining bits in there. The team's next film, Nothing But Trouble, released in 1944, has Laurel and Hardy playing a butler and chef combo, hired to serve at a party in honor of a teenage exiled king. Now, on paper, this should sound like the right ingredient for a Laurel and Hardy film because the two of them have made comedies in which they were hired servants, like From Soup to Nuts or Chump at Oxford, for example. At the start of the film, it looked like it's going to be that way, but partway through the film, it's sort of Laurel and Hardy kind of take a back seat to the whole subplot with the king who runs away from his uncle to try and see what regular American life is like. I think the movie probably would have been better if it was made as a drama for a teenage audience rather than as a Laurel and Hardy vehicle, without them there. Some of the pluses with this film is some of the supporting cast. The woman who hired Laurel and Hardy is Mary Boland, who is known for playing matrons in a lot of movies in the 1930s. She was sort of like the Margaret Dumont character from the Marx Brothers films. The actor playing King Chris I thought was not as annoying as a lot of the child stars from the time, and I really did find him to be very likable. But unlike Air Raid Wardens, the movie is more story-centered rather than gag-oriented, which I felt was the wrong format for the team. It did not always give them a chance to do a lot of routines. I mean, there's not really a whole lot of setups and bits like in Air Raid Wardens. I mean, there's some attempts to try and get some. Like, for example, there's a sequence where Laurel and Hardy are trying to get meat from a lion cage, and there's another one where they referee a neighborhood kids football game, but they weren't really that funny or great. Although, I gotta say, the dinner scene with Laurel serving was kind of amusing. At times, Laurel I should say, seems to be trying to make sarcastic wisecracks, which did not really fit his character. I think that was the fault, which I think is some of the fault of some of the team's Fox films, because at that time, Laurel and Hardy were competing against Abbott and Costello, who at that time were a hot American comedy team. Overall, of all the post-Hal Roach films, I think I kind of prefer the later Fox films like Jitterbugs, Big Noise, and Bullfighters because I feel these MGM ones may have had their moments, but I feel like they should have perhaps, like I said, gone to a studio that specializes in slapstick. If you'd like more information about Laurel and Hardy's 40 films, there's a terrific book called Laurel and Hardy 40s 4 by Scott McGibbon. I'll try and get a link to the book in the description box.